As a young boy growing up in church in the 90s, one of the things that was a staple part of the preaching of that time was an emphasis on the believer's eternal future with Christ. In other words, the average believer was grounded in the teaching that this current world is not our home. Believers were taught to look with expectation towards the coming world where the Bible says new heavens and earth will be established. Believers understood what it meant to be exiles and foreigners on this earth. And that kind of teaching created a certain kind of believer. These were people who were faithful and devoted to the cause of Christ as they kept their hearts stirred by thoughts of eternity. These were people who were patient in trouble because they understood we're not home yet. When we go home, we will finally rest. But there was a kind of tenacity to them in the face of trouble, recognizing that they were not home. There was a kind of sacrificial life that was born from that teaching, where people were not ashamed or afraid to part with worldly goods for the cause of the kingdom. I think Luther captured it in his hymn, A Mighty Fortress, when he says things like, let goods and kindreds go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, but God's truth abideth still. There was a stillness, and I mean the word steel. They was like still, they were strong. These were believers who had a pure devotion, stirred by eternity. But then I noticed that as I grew older, that kind of teaching just kind of vanished. I just suddenly didn't hear it as much anymore. And I think what happened is that some of us in the church began to react to the extreme versions of that teaching. There were some extreme versions of that teaching that, for all its good, created believers who were so separate from the world that they had no impact on the world. I believe the phrase that used to describe that kind of Christian was so heavenly minded that they were no earthly good. These were people who were so separatist in such a way that they were not impacting the culture. And we see that problem also in Second Thessalonians. Paul has to deal with this, where some people were so fixated on eternity that they stopped working. They became idle and were just trying to eat off of other believers because they were just waiting for Christ to come and waiting for eternity and not really getting busy. And so some people were so, in quote, heavenly minded that they were not earthly good. And so there was a reaction to that. There were also some believers forged in that eternity teaching who made God's good gifts evil in and of themselves. So things like money were seen as evil in and of itself. Not the love of money or the pursuit of money ahead of a love of Christ, but just money in and of itself, or all kinds of pleasure. There was a whole list of things that Christians couldn't do. And so I think people just reacted to that, and like we often do, we threw away the baby and the bath water. And so we've come to a place in the church now where, and I mean, I don't know all of the church, and I can't speak for all of the church, but largely speaking, in my experience, maybe I should put it that way, it seems like it's all but disappeared from our teaching and our preaching. In an effort to say believers must have an impact on the world, which we should, in an effort to stress the goodness of God's good gifts like money and pleasure. Not all pleasure is evil. In an effort to balance things out, I think the pendulum has kind of swung to the opposite end, where we hardly ever hear or are motivated or stirred up by the realities of eternity as believers should. So there is a sense in which we don't know what it's like to be aliens or foreigners on earth. There is a sense in which in our current day and time, believers are too at home here. We're looking for our full treasure and our full enjoyment of true life here. We've become so comfortable, and it's as though we're no longer believing or trusting that this is not it, that there is still a future reward to come that ought to stare and change how we live here. So let me just say this. Being heavenly minded is not meant to make us not earthly good, it's meant to change how we live now. Every time the Bible tells us about eternity, it's not telling us to just stand and wait for Christ to come. It teaches eschatology or eternity to stare us now to live different kinds of lives. So it's meant to spur us to action. It's meant to shape our values and our ethics. It was never that we just become the kind of people who just sit down and dream of the by and by and never do anything now or never live full and vibrant lives. Instead, God shows us eternity to change how we live in time. So as Christians, we must walk this very tightrope where we enjoy God's good gifts now, yet we recognize that this is not our best life and that we don't get everything right now. So if this life is your best life, then you're in trouble. If this is all there is for us, then we're in trouble. The teaching about eternity was meant to forge us as certain kinds of people with different ethics, different values. And I want to show you some ways that keeping eternity in mind will shape us now, will change how we live now, will make us more impactful. I believe it's C.S. Lewis that said, since Christians have started to forget about eternity, they have started to become very comfortable here, and it's changed how we live right now. I really just butchered that C.S. Lewis quote, but I'll put it in the caption. But I want to show you some specific ways that keeping eternity in view will shape your life right now. Number one, it will make you faithful in service. Faithful in service. 1 Corinthians 15:32. Paul says, if I fought wild animals in Ephesus with only human hope, what good did that do to me? If the dead are not raised, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. So we see Paul's faithfulness, how he is stoned in one town and he rises up and goes to preach in the next. And Paul is saying the reason why I did that is not because I was looking for any hope here and now. He says, if my only hope was human hopes in this world, then that's a foolish way to live. If this is your only life, eat, drink, for tomorrow we die. Paul's faithfulness in service was fueled by eternity. So he would go and sacrifice. He would go to a city and preach. He would pour out his life for others because he understood that this is not the end. He was not looking for his treasures here, and it spurred him to missions, evangelism, to sacrificial service of others. Are you a pastor and maybe God is calling you to a non-lucrative part of the country or to a kind of ministry that is hard? If your eyes are on eternity, you know there's truly no risk with God, that you're not just dealing with human hopes, human accolades, that we are not home yet and there is still yet future rewards to come. It makes us faithful in service. Thinking about eternity makes us hopeful about justice. 2 Peter 3:13. Peter says, but based on his promise, we wait for the new heavens and a new earth where righteousness will dwell. You see, if this world is all there is, in our fight and our quest for justice, we will be discouraged because we will never have perfect justice here. We will still have the wicked rich and the good poor. It will always be unequal in this world. There will always be mishandling of justice, and we will never fully see full justice. And if this world is all there is, we'll be discouraged because when you help here, you see misfortune there. But because we're waiting for new heavens and earth where God will set things right, it makes us hopeful about our present fight for justice, that we can approximate towards that future world. We will never have it fully here, but we're hopeful that a new heaven and a new earth is coming where God's full righteousness and justice will dwell. Thinking about eternity will make us pure in lifestyle. First John 3, 2 to 3. Dear friends, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet been revealed. We know that when he appears, speaking about Jesus, we will be like him because we will see him as he is. And now watch this. Everyone who has this hope in him purifies himself just as he, Christ, is pure. So in other words, thinking about eternity, understanding the joy and the pleasure of seeing Christ helps us to turn away from all that is ungodly now. It helps us to shun all the pleasure, so-called pleasure, of this world, the ideas of pleasure that this world calls us to, that we keep ourselves pure, waiting for that day when we see Jesus in his fullness and in his beauty and in his glory, when we will become like him. That this hope has a purifying effect. If we think this world is all there is, we will try to get all pleasure now. We will live for all kinds of hedonism right now. But those who have this hope of eternal life in themselves know that at his right hand there is pleasures forevermore, and we live for those superior pleasures, knowing that it's the pure in heart that will see God. It makes us patient in suffering. Romans 8:18, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us. He's speaking about our future glory when we are glorified. And he's saying, see, the sufferings of this present time in this broken world that is groaning and screaming for redemption. And even we believers, even though we have the first fruit of the Spirit, Paul says, even we groan waiting for that fullness of redemption. But we can do it with hope because we know that the sufferings of this present time cannot be compared. And so we are patient. We endure it all, the insult, the shame, the time, the ups and the downs. We endure it all with hope, not like those who have no hope, but with those who are confident about the future that God has promised in new heavens and new earth, where there will be no tears no more, where there will be no more sadness and death, where we will fully dwell in the presence of God with joy forevermore. It keeps us patient in suffering. And finally, it keeps us sacrificial in love. Hebrews 10:34. It says, for you sympathized with the prisoners and accepted with joy the confiscation of your possessions, knowing that you yourselves have a better and enduring possession. In other words, these believers were sacrificial in their love, even though they went to see prisoners, fellow Christians who were in prison. They could have distanced themselves from those prisoners, but they went to see them. They sympathized with them. They were not afraid of their property being taken because of their association with believers. Why? Because they knew that the things in this world is not the end all be all, that they had much enduring and better possessions to come. And so they were not afraid to part with things here and now, knowing that their true possession is yet to come. They were sure about God's promise that they are inheriting a world that cannot be shaken. This world will be shaken. It is sinking sand. The values of this world, the wealth in this world, the accolades of this world will be shaken. Only when believers live for the future world are they able to truly live as believers in this world. If our eyes are on the accolades and the applause and on the pleasure of this world, we will be worldly people who are not the kind of believers who live vibrantly and powerfully for Christ. And so, my encouragement to you is don't forget about forever. Time is an investment in forever. Use your time like one who truly believes time is not the final end, and that we are living for new heavens and new earth where righteousness and true justice dwells. God bless you.